is going to prove to him or herself that I am loved.
都要話俾佢自己聽，我係被愛嘅。
If that child doesn't get it from mommy and daddy,
如果爸爸媽媽冇俾到佢愛，
then that parent has no right to criticize him when they turn to a peer.
咁佢哋就唔可以去批評佢，當佢去喺其他地方去尋找愛。
A lot of parents,
好多嘅父母，
usually the father,
通常都係個爸爸，
drives their children to other people.
都將佢哋嘅小朋友趕去其他地方去尋找愛。
In the book of John,
喺約翰福音裏邊，
Jesus said, love one another.
耶穌話：你哋要彼此相愛。
The commandment that I give to you, that you love one another.
就像我愛你們一樣，呢個就係我俾你哋嘅命令。
Mom, dad, that means loving our children.
媽媽同埋爸爸，即係呢個就係你哋要愛你自己嘅小朋友。
I've had the privilege
我有呢個機會，
of speaking to more young people than probably anyone in history.
可能我同冇有任何人有我同咁多年青人一齊去
I've given
有
over
講座，
25,000 talks.
我有講過25,000個講座。
And in all my life,
喺我一生當中，
in the 100 and some countries and cultures I've been in,
喺超過100個多個國家同埋文化當中，
I don't think I've ever met a young person who didn't want the love of their daddy.
我未見過一個年青人係唔要佢爸爸嘅愛嘅。
If one thing is true of every kid in the world,
如果有一樣嘢係每一個年青人都係正確嘅咧，
their daddy's love.
就係佢爸爸嘅愛。
Now, don't get me wrong.
你唔好誤解我，
I've met so many kids
我見過咁多嘅年青人
in every culture
喺每一個文化，
who will say,
佢都會話俾我聽，
I hate my dad.
我好憎我爸爸，
I wish he were dead.
我希望佢死咗，
I never want to see him again.
我唔想再見到佢，
I wish he'd leave.
我希望佢離開。
I've met so many like that.
好多都係咁嘅，
But you give me 15 minutes
但係你只要俾我15分鐘嘅時間，
with a young person like that,
同一個咁嘅年青人傾偈，
and they change their mind.
佢會改變主意。
You know what I do?
你知我點做呢？
I said, hey, let me tell you about my son.
我就話等我話俾你聽我個仔，
And I tell him how much we love each other.
我話俾佢聽我同我個仔之間
I
嘅
tell
關
him what we
係，
do and things we've done together
我哋一齊去做嘅嘢，
and how we kiss each other.
我哋同大家嘅關係。
And yesterday was his birthday,
你琴日係佢嘅生日，
34 years old.
34歲，
And we still kiss each other.
我哋都同係一齊去擁
And
抱。
within 15 minutes,
喺15分鐘之內，
almost every kid will be in tears.
每一個年青人都會流淚。
Where they were just saying short time before, I hate my dad.
佢可能之前話俾我聽話，佢好
Almost
憎佢
every
爸
one
爸。
of them, no matter what their culture,
喺任何一個文化，每一個人
will say something like this.
都會話俾我聽呢句話。
That's what I always wanted, Mr. McDowell.
佢話：Mr. McDowell，我就係希望
It's all I ever wanted from my dad.
我要我爸爸咁愛我。
And they start to cry.
佢哋就開始喊。
I've had grown men
我有好多成人
so often
Làm
just
vậy.
break down in tears
都係咁喊，
because they never experienced their daddy's love.
因為佢哋冇經歷過佢爸爸嘅愛。
I wrote a book on sexuality,
我寫咗一本書關於性
a
愛，
big, thick one.
一本好大本嘅書，
It's called Why True Love Waits.
就係真愛點解要等。
In there, I believe I proved
喺呢本書裏邊，我相信我證實咗
that the number one reason in every culture
喺每一個文化當中，第一個原因，
why a young lady becomes involved sexually with a young man.
一個年輕嘅女仔點樣同一個男仔
Not
有
the
性
only-
關係，
Not the only reason,
唔係唯一嘅原因，
but by far the number one reason.
但係最重要嘅原因，
They're in search of their daddy's love.
因為佢要尋找佢父親嘅愛。
You know one of the hardest things I say to young ladies?
你知道我對一個年輕嘅女子講嘅最難嘅説話係乜嘢？
Sometimes you have to hurt in order to heal.
有陣時你要受傷害，然後至可以
And
得
I'll say,
醫
young
治。
ladies,
我話年青嘅女子，
you can never, ever find your daddy's love in another man.
你唔可能喺另外一個男人身上揾到你爸爸嘅愛，
Not a stepfather, anyone.
唔係一個媳婦或者係任何人，
Because that'd always be the love of a stepfather.
因為嗰啲都唔係一個真正嘅父親嘅愛，
There's only one daddy's love.
因為你只有一個爸爸，
And the majority of children in the world have to grow up without ever experiencing it.
而呢個世界上大部分嘅小朋友都冇真正嘅父愛。
Every child who grows up without their daddy's love
每一個冇父愛嘅小孩子，
hurts every day of their life.
喺每一日佢嘅生命當中都感受到呢個痛苦。
You don't believe me?
如果你唔相信我的話，
Ask me.
你就要問我。
I've never had a day in my life that I haven't hurt
我冇一日都唔係痛苦嘅，
from never having the love of my daddy.
因為我冇我爸爸嘅愛。
He never once hugged me,
佢從來都冇擁抱過我，
never once ever kissed me,
冇親吻過我，
never ever told me I was special.
從來冇話俾我聽我係好特別嘅。
Never once did I ever hear my father say, "Son, I love you."
從來我冇聽過我爸爸話俾我聽話佢愛我。
You know how that hurts today?
你估到今日我點解都係咁痛苦呢？
Over all the years,
因為過去咁多年當中，
I don't think I've ever ended a conversation with my children,
我冇一次同我個小孩子講話，
whether in person or on the phone,
面對面或者喺電話度，
that the last thing I hear from them,
我同佢哋講嘅最後一句話
"Daddy, I love you."
就係爹哋我愛你。
You say, "Well, that should bring joy."
咁呢個帶俾我好大嘅喜樂，
Oh, it does.
當然啦。
But every day, bless you. Every day it brings agony.
但係每一日都令到我痛苦。
Even like right now,
就算而家
in just sharing this with you,
同你分享呢件事，
I have that emotion.
我都有咁嘅感受。
I wish I'd had a father
我盼望我有咁嘅父親，
who would have just called me up and say, "Son, I love you."
會打電話話俾我聽話佢愛我。
I'm reminded of that of every day when my children say, "Daddy, I love you."
每一日我嘅孩子話俾我聽佢哋愛我時，我都會有呢個記憶。
There's two ways we need to express that affection.
我哋去表達呢個關愛有兩個辦法。
I want to be honest with you.
我要好坦白同你講，
I could get criticized for saying this.
可能有人唔贊同我咁講，
I'm a big boy.
我係個大人。
In my country,
喺我嘅國家，
and I also used to think
我亦都係咁諗。
that Chinese families
中國人嘅家庭
were some of the best families in the world
可能係全世界最好嘅家庭，
until I got to know them.
一直到我認識佢哋為止。
Not at all.
佢哋一啲都唔好。
You know why?
你知點解？
The majority of kids over the years
大部分嘅小孩子，
from Chinese families
即係中國人嘅小朋友，
fear their father.
都好驚佢爸爸，
He's dictatorial.
因為佢好專制，
I pay the bills
因為我
and I
俾
provide a
所
roof.
我俾一個地方你住，我供應你嘅使費。
He's got his lover.
佢有佢嘅情人，
He's got his work.
佢有佢嘅工作。
Of any one culture in the world,
喺世界上咁多嘅文化當中，
I probably never met as many people as in Chinese families of kids who resent their father.
可能只有中國人嘅家庭當中咧，有好多小孩子
If you don't like that, I'm sorry, but that's one
唔中意佢哋嘅
person's
爸爸。
life experience.
呢個可能你唔中意、唔贊同，但係呢
I
個係
found
我
out
嘅
that most Chinese
我嘅經歷。
families are not close.
我發覺中國人嘅家庭唔係好親密嘅，
It's more like a concentration camp.
佢可能好似集中營一樣。
I was just in Singapore.
我喺新加坡，
Oh, was it neat?
Yep.
I did 2 father seminars.
我做咗2個父親嘅聚會，
One sponsored by the Singaporean government.
一個係新加坡政府嘅聚會，
On Sunday morning,
喺星期日朝頭早，
I spoke on relationships
我講到關於關係，
as they relate to you, mainly the father.
關於父親嘅關係。
When I finished,
當我講完嗰時，
I saw something I've never seen in 50 years in ministry.
我喺50年嘅侍奉都冇見過咁嘅情況。
The pastor walked to the podium
個牧師嚟到講台上邊，
and he just stood there.
佢真係企喺度。
He said, I'm going to do something I've never done before.
佢話：我今日要做一件我從來未做過嘅事。
But after hearing what Josh McDowell shared with us,
我哋聽咗 Josh McDowell 嘅分享，
there's so many of you sitting out there
所有好多坐喺我哋當中嘅人，
who wish to God you had a hug from your daddy,
可能希望你嘅爸爸會擁抱你，
and you never have.
而你可能從來未經歷過。
He said, I want the leadership of the church and come and stand in the front.
我要邀請我哋教會嘅所有嘅領導人，
He said, right now,
而家
no matter how old you are,
唔理你嘅年紀係
if
幾
you
多，
if you need a hug,
如果你想有人擁抱你的話，
step out where you are.
你就行前嚟。
I never seen anything like it.
我從來未見過咁嘅嘢。
Grown men, women, 60 years old, bawling.
呢啲男人60歲啦，冇
They
晒
came
頭髮㗎
forward
啦，
from everywhere
喺所有四方八面嚟到前邊，
and just grabbed the leadership of the church.
去擁抱呢個教會嘅
And I think some
牧
of
者。
them, men with men, women with women, I think some of them for 2-3 minutes,
佢哋可能有啲擁抱咗2-3分鐘咁長，
they wouldn't let go.
佢哋都唔願意放手，好特別。
I think that would happen in almost every church in Hong Kong and China.
我相信喺香港同埋中國大陸每一間教會都會發生咁嘅情況，
Crying out.
佢哋都好希望有人擁抱佢，尤其是父親嘅擁抱。
There's 2 ways we express that affection.
我哋有2個辦法去表達呢個咁嘅
One
關愛，
is verbally.
一個係語言上嘅，
I don't care what your culture is.
我唔知道你嘅文化係乜嘢，
I don't care what you think as an adult,
我唔知道你覺得應該係點至啱，
but I can tell you what kids think
但係我可以話俾你聽，小孩子點
when
睇？
they're very young.
佢哋好年前，佢好細個嗰時，
They usually become hardened as they become teenagers.
佢哋越長越大咧，就對呢個事情完全冇咗感受。
They want to hear their daddy say,
佢要聽到佢爸爸講：
Son, I love you.
孩子，我愛你，
You're special.
你係好特別嘅，
My dearest daughter,
我最親愛嘅女兒，
I love you.
我愛你。
It's so wonderful to be your daddy.
呢個係我好高興成為你嘅爸
Our
爸。
kids need to hear that over and over and over again.
我哋嘅小朋友需要一次又一次又一次嘅
I
聽到
don't
呢
care
句
what
話
your。culture is.
我唔理你嘅文化背景如何，
It's built within us.
呢個係我哋心中嘅一個動機。
For me,
對我嚟講，
I'm not saying it should be true for you.
可能對你唔啱嘅。
For me,
對我嚟講，
my goal was 10 times a day.
我嘅目標係一日10次。
When my children were in the house,
我小朋友可能喺屋企，
they would hear me say, I love you,
佢會聽到我話我愛你，
or equivalent of it.
或者其他嘅
Now,
表
to
示
be。honest with you,
好坦白講，
most days I never did that.
可能通常我都做唔到10
I'm
次，
just being honest.
我只係坦白。
Some days maybe it was once or twice,
有陣時可能1-2次，
but some days it was 15 times.
有陣時係15次。
My children need to hear their daddy say, I love you, I love you, I love you.
我個小朋友需要聽到佢爸爸話俾佢聽：我愛你，我愛你，我
With
愛你。
my adopted daughter,
我收養嘅女兒，
I always found a different song to sing for each one of my children as they would grow up.
我每一個小朋友我都有一首歌係特別唱俾佢哋聽
And
嘅。
for my Heather was this.
佢 Heather 係呢首歌
When。she was just a little baby,
當佢係一個小嬰兒嘅時候，
I can't sing.
我唔識唱歌。
Every time I start to sing,
我每一次開始唱歌，
my children say, Daddy, save your voice for the message.
我小朋友就會話：爹哋唔好唱啦，你要講道嘅。
But this was the tune.
呢個就係嗰首歌。
I love you, a bushel and a peck.
我愛你。
I love you, a bushel and a peck, a bushel and a peck, and I love you all to heck. Whee! At about 15, now here's a teenager.
當15歲嗰時，我個女話俾我聽，
I was saying, I love you, a bushel and a peck.
我就會咁唱俾佢聽。
And I love you all to heck. Whee! She says, oh, Daddy, don't do that.
我話唔好唱啦，爸爸唔好唱啦。
So I said, okay, I won't do it anymore.
我話就以後都唔唱啦。
She said, no, no, I want to hear it.
佢話唔係，我想聽嘅。
And we sang it together at 15 years old.
喺15歲嗰時，我哋一齊去唱。
Our children need to hear us.
我哋嘅小朋友要聽到。
Second,
第二，
we need to express that affection
我哋要將呢啲關愛表達出嚟，
with appropriate physical expression.
要用恰當嘅行動去表達出嚟。
I don't care what your culture is.
我唔知道你嘅文化如何。
Everybody says to me, well, you got to understand the Chinese culture.
每個人都話俾佢聽，你要了解中國文化，
Get real.
你要好現實。
You know what they say in the United States?
你知道喺美國佢哋點講嘛？
You got to understand the American culture.
你要明白美國文化。
The way I was raised.
我長大嗰時候，
You never told your child I love you.
你從來唔會話俾你嘅小朋友聽你
You
愛
never
佢，
hugged him.
你從來唔會擁抱佢，
You never expressed physical emotion.
你從來唔會用你嘅身體意願去表達。
I told him once I loved him. When I changed my mind, I'll let him know.
我只係話俾佢知一次我愛佢，如果我改變主意，我會話俾佢聽。
So don't talk to me about the Chinese culture.
所以唔好同我講中國文化。
In reality, it's not much different what it's been in the past in America.
事實上，同
You know
美國以前嘅文化冇乜分別。
Chinese men, like American men, use it as an excuse.
你知唔知？中國嘅男人同美國男人一樣，用呢個做藉口嘅啫。
Because they're wimps.
因為佢哋根本係個弱者。
Takes a real man to hug a child.
因為一個真嘅男人至可以
It
互
takes
相
a
擁
true
抱。
man
一個真正嘅男人
to look his son or daughter in the eyes
至會睇住你嘅女兒或者兒子嘅眼睛，
and say, I love you.
話俾佢聽你愛佢。
We need to express it with a hug,
我哋要擁抱佢哋，
with a kiss,
要親吻佢哋，
with a peck in the cheek,
要同佢哋
an arm on their shoulder,
要喺側邊去擁抱佢，
holding their hand.
要牽住佢個手。
Every kid in the world is crying out for it.
每一個世界上每一個小朋友都需要。
Now look,
你要明白，
if you got a 16-year-old son at home
如果你屋企有個16歲嘅
and
兒
you've
子，
never done it,
而你從來冇做過呢
and
件
you go
事，
home tonight,
如果你今晚翻去
you go into his room,
去到佢間房，
you take his headphones off
拎走佢嗰個
and
headphone，
says, son,
佢話孩
I
子，
love you,
我愛你，
and give him a big hug,
而去抱佢的話咧，
he'll vomit on the carpet.
佢會嘔到一地都係㗎。
And he'll say, Mom!
佢話媽媽
No, Mom!
，Mom，
A little more.
sure Mom，
There you go! Yeah! Mom, Dad is sick.
爸爸黐咗線啊！
But the kid threw up.
不過嗰個仔會嘔到一地都係㗎啦。
You've got to lead up to it.
你要做第一步，
The best time is to start when they're born.
最好嘅時候喺佢啱啱出世就開始啦。
You young men,
我哋當中嘅年青人，
you young fathers,
啲好年青嘅爸爸，
Listen
你要聽我講，
to this great wisdom
要聽我講呢個無價嘅一個智慧，
that came from the greatest woman who ever lived,
係一個最重要嘅女人講嘅，
my wife Dottie.
同埋我太太多田。
If she'd been alive in the Old Testament,
如果佢喺舊約嘅時候就喺度的話咧，
we wouldn't have the book of Solomon, we'd have the book of Dottie.
我哋就唔會有所羅門嗰本書，而有多田嘅書啦。
My wife made these statements to me,
我太太講過呢句話，
profound.
好深奧嘅一句話。
If any one thing my wife ever said to me
如果有人以為我太太有講過呢句話的話，
that had the greatest impact,
呢句話對我最深嘅影響
it was this.
就係呢句啦。
You young fathers, listen.
你啲年青嘅爸爸要聽住。
She said, my two children at the time were 4 and 2 years old.
我當時我兩個細佬哥係2歲同埋4歲。
She said, honey,
佢講話：親愛的，
if you spend time with them now, they'll spend time with you later.
如果你而家同佢喺埋一齊咧，佢哋大咗就會有時間同你喺埋一齊。
Honey, if you will listen to your children now,
如果你而家聽佢哋講嘢，
they'll talk to you later.
佢大咗都會同你講話。
My darling,
佢話：我親愛的，
if you will talk to your children now,
如果你同你嘅小朋友而家講話，
they'll listen to you later.
佢哋長大咗都會聽你講。
If you show an interest in your children now,
如果你而家對你嘅小朋友有關心的話，
they'll show an interest in you later.
佢哋長大咗之後會關心你。
If you hug them now,
如果你而家擁抱佢，
they'll hug you later.
佢哋大咗都會擁抱你。
If you love them now,
如果你而家愛佢的話，
they'll love you later.
佢哋大咗都會愛你。
The last thing she said,
佢講最後一樣嘢，
if you take their little tiny fingers and put them between your big fingers now,
如果你將佢細細嘅手指擺喺你嘅大手指當中，
then later they'll put their big fingers between your fingers.
咁佢大咗之後會將佢哋嘅手牽住你嘅手。
That is so true.
呢個係好真實嘅。
I'm so thankful my wife said that to me.
我為咗我太太講嘅呢句話好感恩。
And I got to tell you this.
我要話俾你聽，
Am I glad it sank in?
我好感恩，因為呢句話入到
I'm
我心中。
I'm 70 years old.
我今日70歲，
I know I don't look it.
我雖然都唔似70歲，
But I'm seeing all those things now
我而家就見到嗰啲嘢發生緊，
because I did it back then.
因為我當時做咗啲嘢。
My son,
我個仔
always the shortest kid in the class,
喺個班上係最矮嗰個，
when he was 10 yeyears old,
佢10歲嘅時候咧，
was an outstanding baseball player for 10 years old.
就玩 baseball 玩得好好嘅，
He quit.
佢唔玩啦。
And he came home and he said, Dad, I quit baseball.
佢翻到屋企話俾我聽話，爹哋我唔玩 baseball。
I said, why?
我話點解？
Because I'd rather have him playing with baseball than with girls.
因為我寧願佢去打波，而唔係去追女仔。
He said, Daddy,
佢話：爸爸，
I'm going to play basketball in the university.
佢話我讀大學嗰時要打籃球，
Shortest kid in class.
班上最矮嗰個。
I'm going to get a big scholarship.
佢話我希望有個獎學金。
I'm so glad I didn't say what I was thinking.
我好感恩，因為我冇講我想講嘅嘢。
I would have regretted it to this day.
如果唔係的話，我到今日都會後悔。
You know what I was thinking?
你知我當時諗緊乜
I
嘢？
almost said to him,
我爭啲同佢講：
Oh, son, your game is baseball.
你最叻嘅係玩 baseball，
You know, shortstop.
你咁矮。
I'm so glad I didn't say that.
我好高興我冇講呢句話。
Instead,
咁跟住
against every emotion in my body,
同我嘅諗法完全唔同。
I played semi-pro basketball
我都自己都玩籃球，
because there was more money in it than playing in university.
因為我打職業籃球會賺多啲錢。
And I was always the shortest man on the team.
我亦都係我成個隊裏邊最矮
And I
嗰個。
think my son wanted to do the same thing.
我相信我個仔都想做同樣嘅嘢。
So glad.
我好高興。
So, okay, son,
我話好啊，
let's go for it.
你就去啦。
That kid
而呢一個仔
became all-American.
就喺全美國，
What he could do with a basketball.
佢又去打籃球，
Incredible.
佢打得非常之好。
He coached for 2 years.
佢亦都成咗個籃球教練。
They had a 44-6 record
佢有個好好嘅 record
in the university.
喺大學裏邊。
Then he left, went and got 2 masters in philosophy and theology.
然後佢讀咗2個碩士學位，一個係
Now he's
哲
getting
學，
his
一個係
doctorate.
神學。
Now he's getting his doctorate.
而家佢讀緊佢嘅博士學位。
When he was at the university,
佢喺大學嘅時候，
I made the majority of his games.
我通常都會睇佢打波。
One time I flew all the way from Moscow for a high school game.
我有次喺莫斯科飛到翻美國去睇佢打波。
Got there 10 minutes before the game started.
係去到嗰時啱啱10分鐘就開始啦，
10 minutes was over.
然後就10分鐘之後
I had to dash to the Los Angeles airport and fly back to Russia.
打完波之後10分鐘我就要去 LA 嘅機場翻返去莫斯科。
34 hours flying for an hour and a half ball game.
34個鐘頭嘅飛機行程，就因為要睇佢1個半鐘頭嘅球
You know what
賽。
that said to my son?
你估呢個咁嘅事情令到我個仔有咩感受呢？
I'm important to my daddy.
我對我嘅爸爸非常之重要。
So this one time, I didn't tell him I was going to try to make the game.
所以有一次咧，我冇話俾佢聽，我會出現喺個比
Because I
賽，
had to fly through Las Vegas,
因為我要通過 Las Vegas，
and I had a very short connection.
我有個好短嘅時間去駁飛機。
And it's better not to tell a child you'll be there and not be there than to not tell him at all.
所以如果你唔知道你會唔會喺度，你最好就唔好話俾佢聽先。
I made the connection.
我啱啱趕到，
When I arrived,
我到嗰時，
the women's game was being played.
嗰時係一個女士嘅籃球，
The men's team
個籃球賽咧
was kitty corner across the court
就喺另外一邊去舉行，
up in the stands,
就喺個另外個角落頭。
all dressed in their basketball uniforms.
佢哋都着好晒啲球衫啦，
I walked in the door.
我就行入去，
Well, everyone knew who I was.
每個人都識得我，
All the eyes turned to me.
所有嘅人都睇住我。
Then I saw my son way across there.
咁我睇到我個仔喺嗰邊，
I walked across the end of the basketball court.
我喺個球場中間過，
4,000 eyes followed me.
4000個眼睛都睇住我。
When I got to the corner of the court,
我去到個球場嘅角落頭，
my son realized it was me.
我嘅仔至發覺原來係我，
He jumps up
佢跳起身，
and he runs down the bleachers.
佢走落嚟
Boom, 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 right down the bleachers.
就跑住過嚟，
Boom, boom, boom.
佢腳步聲係咁嘅。
Okay. Have you ever yelled at your children?
Sometimes
And here we were. I was at one end of the court, he was at the other, and the women were playing.
我喺球場一邊，佢喺另外一邊，而啲女球員喺度比賽緊。
My son didn't realize what was going on
我仔完全冇感覺到咩事發生，
because I have a lot of threats in my life.
我就發覺咗咩事啦。
And your best security
你最好嘅安全感
is not people around you.
唔係有人喺側邊，
It's knowing who's around you.
係知道邊個喺你側邊。
And I can be talking to you and I can see people way over here.
我可能同你講緊話，
When I'm
我
in
睇到其他
crowds,
人，
I'll gradually turn. I'll know every person within a long ways puts their hand in their pocket or anything. I see it. I'm just trained to do that.
我周圍啲人唔理佢哋做乜嘢，我都知得到，因為
So we walk towards each other.
所以我哋行近，
Unbelievable.
呢個係好令人
All the
驚訝。
students would look at me,
所有嘅學生都睇緊我，
and then they look at my son,
佢睇我個仔，
and then they look at me.
然後又睇我
Look，at my son.
又睇我
Look
仔，
at me. Look at
又
my
睇
son.
我，又
Look at
睇
me.
我個仔。
Look at my son. We met right at center court.
我哋喺個球場中間嗰度，
where they had a table like this for the scorekeepers,
佢有張咁嘅台，有啲人
a
喺度，
little longer than this one.
可能長過呢張台。
He was in that corner, and I was on this corner.
我仔喺嗰邊，而我喺呢邊，
And it was like tension.
呢度就好緊張。
Everyone was just staring.
佢大家都睇緊我哋兩個，
We walked up to each other,
我哋行近，
and we just threw arms around each other and gave each other a big kiss.
我哋大家擁抱去
And
請問。
4,000 students broke out applauding. Way to go, McDowell! Yeah, way to go, guy!
所有嘅學生都喺度歡呼。
That night, I was back at the Los Angeles airport.
當天晚上我翻到 LA 嘅機
And
場，
after I checked in,
我 check in 咗之後，
I thought, wow, that was weird.
我話好奇怪，
What happened at that ball game?
我話嗰個比賽點呢？
Then I almost broke out in a sweat.
我爭啲嚇咗一跳，
A little bit of fear swept me
有少少嘅恐懼，
because I realized what had happened.
因為我發覺發生咗咩事。
Two things.
兩件事，
One,
第一，
if I hadn't met my son at half court when he was 2 years old,
如果我喺佢2歲嗰時冇喺球場上同佢見過面，
he wouldn't have met me at half court when he was 20.
佢20歲嗰時就唔會喺球場度見我啦。
I'm glad I listened to my wife.
我好感謝我聽咗我太太嘅忠告。第二，
Why did all those students just break out in a huge applause?
點解所有嘅學生都歡呼？
You know why?
你知點解？
Every one of them
每一個學生
would like to have met their father at half court
都希望喺球場上見到佢嘅爸爸，
and gotten a hug and a kiss.
而得到一個擁抱。
If you spend time with them now, they'll spend time with you later.
如果你而家同佢哋一齊，佢哋大咗之後就會同你一齊。
If you hug them now,
如果你而家擁抱佢，
they'll hug you later.
佢到時就會擁抱你。
The wisdom of my wife.
呢個就係我太太嘅智慧。
Expressing that affection.
你要表達你嘅關愛，
Kids are crying out for it.
你嘅小朋友非常之中意。
Don't allow your child to grow up without knowing the love of their daddy.
你唔好讓你嘅小朋友長大嘅過程當中唔知道佢父親嘅愛，
Because they'll pay a price every day of their life.
如果唔係的話，佢哋會付上好高嘅代價，每一日都有咁嘅代價去付出。
Fifth,
第五樣，
we got to move right along here. Accountability.
責任。
If we truly love our children,
如果我哋真係愛我哋嘅小朋友，
then we will give them reasonable rules.
我哋就會俾佢哋合理嘅一啲規則，
Reasonable boundaries.
合理嘅一啲限制，
Reasonable limits.
合理嘅一啲規條，
And hold them accountable.
而要佢哋負責任。
The Bible over and over says every one of us will be accountable before God.
聖經裏面話俾我哋聽，我哋每個人都要向神去負責。
The best way to prepare a child for that is to hold them accountable to us as their mom and dad.
最好預備你小孩子嘅方法就係你而家要使到佢哋向佢哋父母親負責。
When we give our children reasonable boundaries,
當你俾你嘅小朋友一啲合理嘅限制嘅時候，
it says three things.
你講咗3件事。
One,
第一，
I'm responsible.
話你係有責任嘅。
Second,
第二，
I have self-control.
我係有自治嘅能力。
But you can't guess what the third one is.
你可以估一估第3係乜嘢？
I am loved.
我係被愛嘅。
You say, what?
你話點解？
Yeah. I do not believe a teenager in any culture
我唔相信喺任何嘅文化當中嘅年青人
can really believe
可以相信
My mom and dad love me
我嘅爸爸媽媽愛我，
unless they're given reasonable limits and held accountable.
除非你俾佢哋一啲限制，然後你要佢哋負責任。
Let me try to illustrate something.
等我再解釋多少少。
In raising my 4 children,
喺我養大我4個小朋友，
which was a period of many years,
有好多年嘅時間。
one of the top 3 or 4, 5 phrases I used to hear over and over again
我時常聽到嘅幾句話
was something like this.
係呢幾句：
Daddy,
爸爸，
Jack said he wished that you were his father.
我同學話佢希望你係佢嘅父親。
Daddy,
爸爸，
today Nancy said she really wished that you were her dad.
今日 Nancy 都話佢希望你係佢嘅爸爸。
My daughter Katie
我嘅女兒啊 Katie
was a junior
係
next
喺
to
讀
last
書
year
嗰
of
時
high school, a private Christian school.
喺一個基督教學校裏邊，
She said to me,
佢同我講：
Jennifer today told me that she really wished that you were her daddy.
Jennifer 今日話俾我聽，佢希望你係佢嘅父親。
I said, well, why would she say that?
我話點解佢咁講咧？
They had that coming Saturday, they had a big party.